Good morning, everybody. We are really happy to have you with us for the tourism observation and smart tourism, how big data can help monitoring and enhancing heritage sites. This is a workshop organized in the framework of our World Heritage Initiative. Just to explain the context, as you know, all of you, 2022 will be the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. And this represents a unique opportunity to reflect on the spirit which supported its adoption in 1972, on the challenges that it confronts today and will likely face tomorrow in achieving its purpose of ensuring the identification, protection, conservation, presentation, and transmission to future generations of the cultural and natural heritage. So the main purpose of this important initiative, of our World Heritage Initiative, is to promote conditions for a closer cooperation and interchange among the different constituents of civil society, UNESCO, and the state parties of the World Heritage Convention, with a view to support heritage conservation efforts, expand its reach, and improve transparency and accountability of the decision-making processes. Our World Heritage Initiative also intends to bring together representatives of civil society to develop an effective network able to address World Heritage conservation challenges. In this framework, we are organizing all through February several initiatives, several workshops and seminars dedicated to the tourism theme. All the year 2021 will be dedicated to 12 different themes, all of them in relation with World Heritage. February is the tourism theme, and we are organizing during this month 21 events. We have prepared 210 recommendations on 21 different themes with the intention, the goal to contribute to this 2021 debate, preparing the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. So let me present you very, very briefly the different events that we organized and we are still organizing during February on the tourism theme. We started with 3 policy recommendation workshops, webinars, which took place in February 1st, 8th, and 15th. I started from this because recommendations are a very important part of our contribution during this tourism theme, and I will explain this just afterwards. I will explain the fact that we need you all in order to contribute to these recommendations for better synergies between heritage and tourism. Concerning the other events, we organized a lot of regional events with, for example, a triple event in India related to Indian World Heritage Sites, an event in the Mediterranean, an event in France related to World Heritage Sites and also a Grand Site in France, an event more organized in relation with World Heritage Sites in Uzbekistan, one in relation with natural and cultural sites in Quebec, one in Latin America, which will take place the day after tomorrow. We'll speak about this just afterwards. One in West Africa and one in China. I didn't speak before about those 2 events, the one which is organized today, and also a very interesting, very important event that took place last Friday, and which in fact examined the possible contributions of the tourism industry to heritage conservation. We also have associated events, and please note the day of our closing event, which will take place on Friday, February the 26th. So a lot of events, and this week will be particularly rich with no less than 5 other events, one every day, In fact, at the very moment we are speaking here, there is another event in relationship with heritage and art in Egypt. We will have tomorrow an event in relationship with Africa, with West Africa, Senegal, and other Western African countries in relation with World Heritage. The day after tomorrow, a very important event localized in Latin America. The 24th, also an event in relationship with the historical areas of Istanbul, and the 24th, an event in China with in relationship with also World Heritage sites in France. So please stay connected and participate. You are very welcome to participate if these themes are interesting for you. As I said before, we have a lot of events, but these events also aim at building something that will last more than this February tourism month. In particular, a lot of colleagues, businesses, institutions submitted recommendations on 21 different themes, recommendations for better synergies between tourism and World Heritage. All those recommendations are online on this address here that we will copy also in the chat, and that you will find quite easily on the website of our World Heritage Initiative. These recommendations target different pre-identified targets: the World Heritage Committee, the advisory bodies, UNESCO, governments and state parties, local authorities, tourism industries, and media, as well as NGOs. They are organized in 4 different groups of recommendations, and I will pass very quickly here the different themes. The first on economic development and well-being. The recommendations are, many of them at least, related to the SDGs. For example, recommendations here for tourism and the no poverty goal, or for good health and well-being. But we can also have more general themes, such as recommendation number 4 on tourism and host communities. The second group is about equity, peace, and social justice, with also 4 other groups of recommendations. The third on environmental conservation. And the fourth on intellectual development. You can see here the different themes for the recommendations. We are really invited to discover these recommendations on the page of our World Heritage Initiative. You will find them organized according to the 4 groups that I just presented, and you can react either to all the 21 themes or to the ones which are more relevant for you. For example, you can react here to tourism and quality education. React means that you will find yourself in a page of this, which presents like this. This is on a software called Qualtrics, which allows you to react to each recommendation and really react to say if you agree or if you have a totally different point of view. This is the game for us, and we are really willing to have your feedback, which of course mean that you can be very critical to the recommendations that are made by the colleagues. So please do not hesitate. We are really looking forward to have your feedback. I take also this opportunity to thank a lot the University of Lugano, who contributed a lot to the organization of these Qualtrics surveys that allow us to collect your recommendations. So this is the page in which you can find them, and this is the page in which you can react and bring your feedback. So this is what I would like to tell you today, just to explain that our webinar today is not an isolated activity, but that it takes place in a more broader framework. With this, I will stop sharing, and I will pass the floor to our moderator for today, Professor Lorenzo Cantoni. Lorenzo Cantoni, who is professor at USI, Università della Svizzera Italiana in Lugano, Faculty of Communication, Culture and Society, where he is director of the Institute of Digital Technologies for Communication. Lorenzo is also a chairholder of the UNESCO Chair in ICT to develop and promote sustainable tourism in World Heritage Sites, established in USI, Università della Svizzera Italiana, in 2013. He is USI Prorector for Education and Students' Experience, Vice Director of the Master in International Tourism, and Director of the Master in Digital Fashion Communication, done in collaboration with Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne. So thank you, Lorenzo, and I take also the advantage to thank all the colleagues, all the participants of this webinar. Floor is yours, Lorenzo.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you, everybody. Very happy to share with you this afternoon. The topic, as you know, is tourism observation and smart tourism. I will have the chance to say a couple of words about smart tourism in the end of this workshop, also to, in a sense, provide kind of a fil rouge across the different presentations. So without any further delay, I'm inviting Carmelo Ignacolo, is currently a PhD candidate in city.
Maybe Maria, if you prefer, I can introduce myself.
Maybe it's better.
Going. Yeah.
Please, Carmelo.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is
Carmelo.
I'm a PhD candidate in city design and development at MIT and an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University GSAP, where I teach a graduate course on digital techniques for urban design. And let me share my screen, and hopefully I can get the presentation started. Okay, so yeah, thank you again, Maria and Lorenzo, for the introduction. Super excited to kick off this debate on tourism observation and smart tourism today. The title of my short presentation for today is Big Data and Data Visualization Techniques for Tourism Monitoring in Venice. I will be presenting some of the findings and tools that I've employed with my research team from Harvard and MIT to understand, map, and visualize tourism dynamics at a granular level in the city of Venice, Italy, while utilizing a big data analytics approach. As Maria and Lorenzo mentioned before, I'm a researcher and project manager at MIT Civic Data Design Lab. It's a lab directed by Professor Sarah Williams, and it's a sort of an interdisciplinary research lab at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT that tackles a broad array of urban questions while employing large data set and constructing interactive visualization for social impact. And my presentation for today is directly related to the group of policy recommendations that Maria introduced before on better quantitative and qualitative knowledge for tourism. So in other words, my suggested policy recommendation is primarily about the need for long-term infrastructural investments for digital monitoring systems of tourism dynamics in World Heritage Sites. And as you know, you can read more about it on Qualtrics. With the intent of setting the ground for our conversation today, I want to read with you this quote from Tom Goodwin's book, The Battle is for the Customer Interface. Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, has no inventory. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. Something interesting is happening. What has been happening for the past decade in regards to the rise of the sharing economy has been paralleled with an unprecedented data deluge for urbanists and city experts. But how can we make sense of this large amount of data? How can we synthesize it and visualize it for social impact? And more specifically, how could advanced data visualization and urban analytics help us render these complex dynamics on interactive and open source maps to support spatially specific policies in relation to tourism? 2 years ago, Francesco Banderin, former UNESCO Assistant Director and current member of our World Heritage Initiative team, wrote in an interview on the magazine volume that in the city of Venice, quote, "Of course, tourists are welcome, but the purpose of preserving heritage is sort of lost. You invest public resources for preserving heritage, and then the beneficiary is essentially a private industry that has not contributed to the effort, and on top, it alienates the citizens." He concludes by saying that to achieve a balance, a management process is extremely important. But how can we achieve this balance if very little is still known nowadays about how tourists move and experience spaces in cities? So for today, I'd like to share with you some findings from the project I initiated at and led at MIT with a research group of like economists, computer scientists, and planners from both MIT and Harvard. It's a project about Venice, very well-known tourist destination and historic city, where heritage commodification has dramatically changed how the city operates. Throughout the last 20 years, image-focused social media marketing strategies and international flows of capital, combined with an increase in disposable income, have contributed to the skyrocketing popularity of some specific places. And this series of intertwined socioeconomic phenomena have put entire cities like Venice at a sort of into an existential conundrum. Can a city be both a tourist attraction and a nice place to live? In terms of population, the number of permanent residents in the historic center has dropped since the end of World War II, as you can see in this graph. And before the canceled flights and lockdowns, the streets of Venice were overwhelmed with approximately 30 million tourists a year. Imagine that in certain moment of the year, there was a sort of ratio of 1 resident for every 140 visitors. And with this project, what we hope with my research team was to sort of enrich the spatial understanding of how tourism and physical spaces are deeply intertwined, and how we can build a more socio-economic resilient Venice. We recently shared some of these thoughts in an article that was published on the magazine on urbanism, and it's titled "The Great Emptiness: How COVID-19 and Tourism Rely on Historic Centers in Italy." In order to build a more spatially specific understanding of the city, we started mapping the depopulation phenomenon at a granular level. So again, here we're using interactive map visualization techniques by employing census data released by the Italian government to actually see at a granular level the decrease in population in the city center. Through this interactive visualization, you can easily click on the hexagons and see exactly the decrease between 1991 and 2011. And you can have the same type of information about unoccupied dwellings. After constructing this interactive map, we sort of asked the following question: how can we construct a tourism index that detects areas of tourism saturation at a granular level by taking into account the complex socioeconomic fabric of the city of Venice? In order to construct this index, we utilize different data sets. Data set from inside Airbnb, data set from TripAdvisor reviews, and location of certain type of amenities or shops like souvenir shops, designer stores, mass shops in Venice, of course, very well known for the carnival related activities, and jewelry stores. However, while saying that, I'm fully aware that this task is particularly difficult since the boundaries between industries serving tourists and those providing services to residents and commuters are pretty much permeable and ambiguous. In this map, for example, you can see almost like 6,500 Airbnb listings in the historic city center of Venice in January 2020. Some of them are even able to host approximately like 20 people. You can see the large red bubble on the bottom part of the map. In blue color, you can see the restaurants, and the size of each restaurant of these 997 restaurants corresponds to the enterprise's internationality score. So this is something I'm gonna go in details in a bit. In regard to short-term accommodation, we use data scraped from inside Airbnb. And while working with the data, some unique patterns sort of emerged along the way. And for example, the host named Views on Venice resulted as the manager of up to 90 apartments in the lagoon city, with 77 accommodation options listed on Airbnb in January 2020. On the restaurant side, we wanted to understand what were the restaurants attracting more international customers. And in order to do that, we employed two metrics to construct an internationality score: percent of reviews in Italian and homogeneity index. So you can see from the graph that values closer to 0 mean that the restaurant is very Italian somehow and not diverse in its non-Italian reviews. And values closer to 0 imply that the restaurant is very international and diverse in its group of international reviews. While I sort of absolutely recognize the value of big data, it's always really important to ground truth our statistical models. So for example, in this image, you can see a location called Bar Spritz, and it's a coffee shop that has 1/4 Italian reviews and an homogeneity index of 0.6. So it scores pretty low in terms of internationality. Quite a different story for this other coffee shop, all'Orologio. As I briefly mentioned before, we also use data from that we got from the Google API to get access to spatial information about other activities related to tourism, such as souvenir shops, mask shops, expensive designer shops, and also jewelry stores in Venice. Having consolidated these rich data set, again, we fully believe that compiling interactive visualization is crucial in order to enable policy discussion among stakeholders, communities, and city officials. So for example, in this interactive map, you can have all the layers that I just mentioned before live, and you can interact with it and sort of play and see how certain patterns, spatial patterns, are forming in the historic city. So by taking all these variables into account, we compiled the tourism index that sort of calculates the average standard deviation from the mean of all the aforementioned variables. Now you can see this as a sort of static map, but I hope that municipalities would eventually employ similar methodology or the same toolkit to construct tourism index at a granular level that can change maybe on a weekly basis, depending on how certain activities open up in the city. Having mapped the areas affected sort of by tourism saturation that were shown in the map that I briefly showed you before, the second question we asked in this study was, what's the predictive power of urban form parameters such as street width, landmarks, public spaces to explain the Venetian tourism city relationship? So what aspects of the built environment predict tourism levels at a granular level in Venice? Again, we compiled a series of data, for example, location of landmarks with the number of reviews associated with them. So you can see this map of landmarks in the city. Street width data, really important in order to capture the capacity of the existing street network in terms of human navigation. And quite interesting, for example, I want to spend a bit more time on this visualization that illustrates the percentage change of street width at the nodes of the city street network. So when pedestrians navigate spaces, they are highly susceptible to sudden changes in the surrounding built environment features. So we sort of hypothesized that in intersection between large spaces and narrow alleys, pedestrians tend to slow down, to reorient themselves, and spend a bit more time to capture the physical changes in their surrounding. So this is why we calculated the average change in street width in the city. Following a very similar approach, the data sets were sort of compiled in another interactive visualization that enable navigation about the information I presented before, including percentage of open spaces in the city. We concluded our study by running a spatial regression model by using as independent variables the urban form parameters. And our analysis sort of suggests that policymakers should watch for over touristification in the proximity of local landmarks, and interestingly enough, at the entrances to public squares from narrow streets. So we sort of like thought that by defining spatial zones around such high danger areas, policymakers can prevent an uncontrollable follow-on tourism effect. And this is something that can be literally used as a way to check on real time the dynamics and processes related to tourism in the city. And if I have maybe just 2 more minutes, I just want to show some of the—
Just 1 minute.
Just 1 minute, Lorenzo. Okay, sure, I'll be super quick. About like other interesting studies that can be done today, given the COVID-19 pandemic and how the tourism industry has been highly affected on, for example, studying tourism flows during like lockdown periods. I mean, as you can see through this visualization, you can literally map, for example, this is like an DNA data set about visitors' nationalities. And it's quite interesting to see how the tourism flow is changing like in the recent month because of the ongoing pandemic. And quite interesting results can emerge out of this visualization, even at a granular level in the neighborhoods, when we can see how different nationality of visitors enjoy certain neighborhoods more than others. And this could be extremely important for city officials to eventually promote city branding strategies in specific countries. So that's it for now. Look forward to like discussion and conversation, and thanks for your kind attention. And I guess, Sairi, the floor is yours now. I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmelo. Thanks a lot. So we will have immediately after a second presentation by Sairi Piñeros, Tourism Practices and Big Data in World Heritage Sites. Sairi is currently a research professor at the Externado de Colombia University, and then we will collect all the questions about the first 2 presentations. Please, Sairi, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Today I will talk about how digital footprints left by tourists on the internet may provide valuable information to analyze tourism practice in World Heritage Sites. So a statistic to study tourism in World Heritage Sites are typically the following: international arrivals, domestic mobility, occupancy in accommodation sector, and sometimes survey on tourist entrance, museums, parks. Usually, the scale of this information is punctual, visitor attraction and accommodation. In some cases, the information is grouped to obtain other scales, city and country. In the case of the developing countries, such statistics are rarely available and usually restricted. However, this information limiting to know the tourist practice, especially in public sites or sites with free entrance. Some World Heritage Sites included this kind of public space, and big data can help to monitoring these sites. Overcoming big data helps to eliminate these limits of the statistic tourism information, and for tourism, the big or massive data usually emerge by the social network. Tourists broadcast their pictures, video, stories, and anecdotes through websites such as sites to sharing pictures, Instagram, blogs, forums, travels community, TripAdvisor, and other social networks, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. Here is a picture to a world, a panorama in the world, and now panorama is acquired by Google, and the photos we integrate to Google Earth and Google Maps. So in my thesis research, I worked with Gaël Charreron and a Silva team. We are working with Flickr, Panorama, Instagram, and TripAdvisor information. For all sources, we have the geographical localization, latitude and longitude. For TripAdvisor, we have also the data of attraction, hotels, restaurants, ranking, language of review. The data of Panorama, Flickr, Instagram, and TripAdvisor give us a corpus of knowledge on tourist practice, in particular space in terms of visit size, hotels, and restaurants. This big data must help to analyze and understand the tourist practice in the World Heritage Sites, and the countries that don't have information. For this reason, I present you Cartagena de Indias case. Cartagena de Indias, the capital of Bolivar Department, is a city located northwest of the Colombian Caribbean coast and has a population around 1 million citizens. The city was founded in 1503. For the beginning, the city, it was central place to trade goods and slaves between America and Europe. To protect the city from attacks by pirates and corsairs between 17th and 18th century, the Spanish kingdom built military structures, many forts around the bay, around the city, one walls around the city, and the fortress San Felipe de Barajas Castle. In 1984, UNESCO inscribed Cartagena as World Heritage Site, thanks to this military architecture, which is represented by the port, fortress, and group of monuments. The group of monuments is located inside to the historical center that you can see here in gray. Here you can see this example of tourism information available of the city, international air passengers, accommodation, number of hotels, and visitor per attraction, in this case, San Felipe de Barajas Castle. This city, we extracted more than 200,000 photographs posted on Flickr and Instagram, and more than 100,000 TripAdvisor reviews. On the top 5 sites TripAdvisor, 4 sites are inside to UNESCO area, and 2 of them correspond to public areas, Waller City and Santo Domingo Square. More than 18% of the review are posted for foreign visitors. This information can be specialized using RGs to visualize all pictures located in the city and create a map of density. With the spatialization, we can see pictures concentration in the historical center, San Felipe de Barajas Castle, and Boca Grande tourist area. And thanks to TripAdvisor review, it is possible to trace relation between different sites. For example, in this graph, you can see the relation between attraction in Cartagena, La Popa Hill, San Felipe de Barajas Castle, and the Wallet City have a close relation between TripAdvisor review, because the people who comment Wallet City and San Felipe de Barajas Castle also discuss La Popa Hill. We can also the interaction between other attractions inside to the historical center, and especially the squares and monuments, that this is important to understand the dynamic of the tourism in these sites. Another scale, it is possible to know tourist interaction between different sites around the city, like a historical center here with Rosario Island here. But also, it is possible the relation between Cartagena and other destination in Colombian Caribbean coast. In this case, San Andres Island and Santa Marta City. And finally, it's possible to know the relation between Cartagena and other destination in Colombia. The relation between other UNESCO World Sites in the country. But it is possible to know the perception of the sites with the review TripAdvisor. For that, we analyze this review using Iramutech, a software that allows textual analysis in different language. Using the text corpus, Iramutech software does an hierarchical classification defined by lexical class, and each represent a theme. The classes are defined by their lexicon proximity. This software calculates a correspondence factor analyzed by lexicon proximity of the words. And now I show you 2 examples. First, correspond to analyze of a Spanish review. This image shows us the score, site, and percentage of each class. So first class is 30.2% of the body of text correspond to the historical heritage theme. The second class, 19.5%, the architecture of the historical center. The third class, 26.8 to seaside tourist practice, and the fourth class, 23.6% of the night activities. So for Spanish speakers, seaside tourist practice and cultural heritage are the theme that they share on TripAdvisor. CA show us an opposition between seaside tourist practice and cultural activities. The class 3 and 4 are nearless because they grouped the historical cultural heritage theme. And class 2 is near to them because night activities are done in the historical center. But they are a different to English review. Unlike first example, we are here 5 class. First class correspond to night activities with 29.2% of the review. The second class historical heritage, third class museums, fourth class guide tours, and fifth class seaside tourist practice. In this case, for English speaker, guided tours and museums are sources more important than Spanish speakers. CA show us an opposition between site tourist practice and cultural activities, but between them we are the class guide tours. This analysis allow knowing part of the tourist practice and their experience, also to know the image that tourists communicate to potential visitors. And that is important to understand and monitor World Heritage sites. So to conclusion, using big data in tourism provides new elements to understand better the tourist practice, interaction between different sites and the perception of them. The evidence of tourist practice provided big data and place without statistics, for example, public space. And it is possible to analyze tourist practice at different geographical scale and interaction with other sites. Moreover, big data provide information to analyze and to understand the tourist practice in developing countries or the countries without statistical information, and to help to monitor, in this case, for example, the practice in World Heritage sites. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Saria, for your presentation. And now we have a few minutes to collect questions and to answer. So I've seen a question by Tain asking Carmelo if those images are available online, which I believe is the case. I think I've seen them somewhere online, but I believe that could be answered on the chat itself. So to provide
I can drop you the link. They're all available.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah,
mostly done on like Keplero.gl and Mapbox.
Yeah. Any further questions? So Carlos Ferreira, a question for you, Carmelo.
Oh yeah, thank you, Carlos, and great to have you here today. Yeah, temporal implications are currently considered in terms of like the distribution of Airbnbs and COVID-19 restriction. What I really hope, to be honest, is that these sort of studies could be done like, let's say, cyclically, like every month or like every week, because the number of shops and sort of activities that we've employed keep changing. So the idea is that if we have like an analysis that keep changing over time, we might identify even more precise trends about certain changes in specific neighborhoods. So just to like answer to your question, like we're not taking into account right now like a temporal approach for the Google locations, but we are taking into account like changes in short-term accommodations and number of reviews.
Thank you, Carmelo. A question for Saia from Maria. Do you mind? And maybe also the following one by Consuelo. You might start answering also to the second one, and maybe Carmelo could add something.
Okay, I think that the recommendation to local authority is to study the practice, how tourists do in these sites, how the relation between the sites And I think because maybe they focus only in the one attraction, but not the interaction and different sides. And that's it's important to understand the practical tourists, but understand how tourists do in these sites. And for the people, for local people, for example, when we go to an place, I don't know, and park, but it's for local, and then it's for tourists that know many information to this practice and to hope to now change the place. For me, this is one recommendation to local management. And I don't know, that Consuelo is a question for me or for Carmelo too?
Yeah, I think it might be for both. So how would you let's say see interactions based on your data? For instance, pictures, consider also locals, including locals in the image. I understand that you haven't analyzed the contents of the images, but how could your approach include those interactions?
So for this interaction, I think when analyze a photograph, it's interesting to know that maybe this photograph is not only for the space, for monuments, but so local activities. For example, artisania or place, or maybe the quotidianity of the people. And I think maybe when push on this analyze, we can see another thing in material for the study to the relation between local and tourists. But I think it's one of the things that is possible to study in the next step.
Thank you. So yeah, Carmelo, please.
Yeah, maybe I can briefly add that it's a very interesting question. It's very hard to answer to this question. As I mentioned, there are not defined boundaries between what is necessarily for a tourist and for a resident. Like there are like some gray areas, so it's quite hard to make this distinction. But in general, in our work, I think one of the main limitations is that we didn't manage to run like a lot of like qualitative work on the ground because of the ongoing pandemic. And I believe that we would have grasped a bit more details about this like interaction while conducting like more work on the ground in the city of Venice.
Thank you, Carmelo. Could you also address the other question from a user named User?
Yeah. So hello, user. So I think the relationship between tourism index and cultural heritage was sort of proven through like a spatial regression model that utilized number of reviews associated to each landmark in Venice. So it would have been interesting, for example, to consider who was the authority in charge of defining that landmark as a heritage site or like a protected like or listed building. So that's something I love to explore more and get into the politics of what gets also included in this list. But for now, since it was a sort of crowdsource approach, we decided to utilize the data available on Google locations and explain the relationship between what we measure as tourism intensity through like tourism related activities and features of the built environment. I mean, I come from an architecture background, so I'm sort of obsessed with the quality and features of how things look like physically. So this is why I started like looking at parameters such as like street width, like buildings features, or like open spaces, etc. So I hope that helps answering the question.
Yeah, could you, Diego has added a small part to it. Could you, in the last intervention
Great point, Rodrigo. I love to do that. I mean, that's something to consider as well. Like real estate trends are quite interesting data set to consider how like the market is moving in the city. I mean, Venice has a certain peculiarity that like, since the city center is not like enormous, it's like pretty much walkable, like distances do not have the same respect to other areas around the world, but it would be interesting to consider that in a spatial regression model as well. Thanks for your note.
Thank you. So we have several. So I'm coming to you. A couple of colleagues, but I believe this is a question many of us have when having the chances and the opportunity to see so great presentations and visualizations of data is the question about, okay, how can we go down the road until the point in which such data change or help to change tourism design? So could you say something about this possibility of co-creating with tourists, the touristic experience?
Yes, and when I study in my thesis research, I know when I analyze the kind of comments, it is possible to find some words that is in relation with the local activities, for example. In this case, in Cartagena, one character is Getsemani, and this character, for example, for tourists is more important than a historical center because it's more authentic. I think that's maybe when we studied review, for example, we have information for interaction by local, by authentic, and is possible to co-create this image for the sites, not only the tourist image, but the image for the local and tourists, and this process of co-creation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely listening is a major part of this, of being able to understand the reactions and the opinions by travelers. I don't see further questions, so I think we might move to the next couple of presentations. So both will be presented by Gaël Charéron and Sébastien Jacot. Even if the first one has Gaël as first author and Sébastien as second author, and vice versa for the second one. So Gaël is currently the Dean of Computer Science and Head of Master in Data and Artificial Intelligence at ESILV in Paris, while Sébastien is currently the Director of IRES. So congratulations again. Sébastien has been appointed a few weeks ago, as far as I remember, and so congratulations. So the first presentation will be about digital data for knowledge of tourism in cultural science, while the second one will be about interpretation from below, analyzing online tourist comments to identify the image and interpretations of heritage. So I invite both of you to start the first presentation.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the previous presentations. So we will speak in two voices with Gaël Charéron about digital data for knowledge of tourism in cultural sites. We decided not to present one specific case, but to have various cases in order to give an overview about the links between tourism observation and the type of problematization. We will do this in the two presentations. So to begin, we want to present an alternative approach to tourism observation, also related to recommendations presented previously. So the classical approach of tourism observation is based on administrative data of tourism, implying crossing a border, implying implicitly a specific definition of tourist territories or market data based on consumption, one night, one monument, one meal. However, tourism goes beyond this, as many activities are not measured, are not paid, are non-market activities. So the challenge is then to propose other visualizations of tourism and other modes of knowledge, taking an interest in tourist practices, mobilities, the experiences they made, and the stories to which they give rise, through digital data from social networks, in relation also to our World Heritage Initiative, as on the website it is written, the challenge of support sciences-based decision-making. So objectifying tourist practices and volumes for the purposes of understanding and controlling tourism and also promoting its value for local development in specific cases. More specifically, we want to identify the spaces and perimeters of tourist practices with the challenges of local development and equity of the effects of tourism. Heritage tourism is not reducible to the practices on the site, but goes far beyond. We can refer to the work of Antonio Polo Russo, which was on Venice specifically. And in some cases, there is a discrepancy between heritage site and tourist destination. We want to show that we have maybe to try to go beyond this gap. We also want to know the practices of visitors and locals around heritage, points of concentration, meeting spaces, sharing, but also disjunctions between visitors and local. And there is this overall issue of tourist observation for the purposes of tourist regulation and local development. Just to say that we also promote an interdisciplinary approach, crossing anthropology, computing sciences, geography. We work with Saskia Cousin, for instance, which is anthropologist of tourism. And we promote a kind of ethnographical approach of tourism. So concerning the data, we qualify them of digital footprints because they can be regarded as signs of tourist practices. We only consider in our study voluntary data, which imply an explicit choice to share them from the perspective of the tourist. We don't collect data that have been collected implicitly, such as by phone companies, for instance, or credit card companies. Of course, the tourists don't know that we will use this data, but they give publicity to their experiences, to their practices through online social networks. However, these data are not a reflection of reality. Of course, we have to pay attention to several biases. I will develop them. So first, a bias of representation. Of course, not all visitors are connected, leave a picture, leave a comment. On Airbnb, for instance, we say that only 1/3 of the visitors will leave a comment online. There are also sociological variations, etc. There is also a kind of socio-technical bias because the reviews are formatted by market mechanism. There is an economy of recommendation, an economy of trust that will try to pre-format the review from the visitors. But we want to use this data beyond their commercial purpose for knowledge to understand what tourists do and say. So, Gaël.
Okay, I just present data source we use in our project. We began with Flickr and Panoramio 10 years ago, and we make density map. We have an example, next slide. After we can try to use more complex data source like TripAdvisor. And the last we use is booking.com. And we also use Instagram, hotel.com, but hotel.com is very small databases. Only 30 million of reviews is small compared to the other data source. Next slide. You forget one, Sebastian, I think. No? Not the process?
No, it's not there.
Okay. This is the first map we make 10 years ago. It's a blank page, and only point is photo, this photographical point, and there are only that on this map. After we make the same work with TripAdvisor. Next slide. This is TripAdvisor 20 years ago. You can see small point in North America and Europe. And after, progressively, we can view the diffusion of attraction, restaurant, hotel in TripAdvisor.com. And I think this is the last one. And you can see road in the North America, and Europe is black. There are many points in Europe. This one. To resume the process, we have three parts. One part of scrapping. We can use API, web page, open data like OpenStreetMap. We make a part of querying. We scrap the data and passing the data to convert to a unique JSON format. And after we make a treatment, we try to align all the data with the same shapefile. You can compare and benchmark several destinations. And after we make all the data in database with places, review, and user. To have an example of the data, the size of the data, Booking.com for 4 years is 200 million of review for 2 million of place and near 100 million of user. But with Booking, we can have only data from 2 years before. After Booking, stop to publish the information. TripAdvisor published all the information since for 20 years ago. And in 2 years is approximately 300 million of review for 50 million of users. The first map we can see is density map, but density map is not efficient to analyze tourism displacement. We make some graph circulation like say in Cartagena is a graph circulation with Bordeaux, Carcassonne. The color detect community of practice. You can see several community. And the size of the link is the number of tourism in the two areas.
So I will go on. So the idea of this first case study is to show that we can have another perspective on tourist destination and the connection between cultural sites by focusing on the relations that the tourists make by their circulations and their the comments, the review that they left. So this is the first map about the big region around Bordeaux. That goes from Bordeaux to La Rochelle to Cathedral Saint-Cécile is another UNESCO site in Albi. There is also Carcassonne, another UNESCO site around 250 kilometers far from Bordeaux. So the idea is to show you that thanks to this type of data, we have to redefine what is a tourist destination. The next slide will show you the confrontation between two scales of analysis. So in black and white on the right, you have the same presentation as previously, the connections at a regional scale between a specific place in Bordeaux, very central in the UNESCO World Heritage perimeter. Whereas the color map here is a network of places inside Bordeaux, inside the World Heritage site. So the conclusion that we draw on that is that the tourist space isn't an area, but a network of places. And following that, having in mind what does it mean for local managers, elected representative, etc., it may lead to new synergies between site managers, UNESCO site managers, given the fact that the tourists already cross the boundaries and will connect various spaces. So this was our first case. The second one will follow this idea of going through the administrative boundaries thanks to this type of data. This map come from a study that we made with Lille Metropolitan Government and the Urbanism Agency about Lille Metropolitan Tourism. So in yellow in this map, in the northern part of France. And the challenge for them is to develop leisure tourism. And we wanted to identify how Lille, the city of Lille, is a stage inside mobilities on a larger scale. So to do this, we drew a map of all the places taken in picture by any visitor who also took a picture in the metropolitan area of Lille. So we mapped every place where he also took a picture 5 days before, saying that Lille was a kind of a step in a more larger trip. So this space stretches from London to Amsterdam and Paris, drawing a very wide perimeter, an international perimeter. However, high densities of pictures can be spotted towards the coast there, in Belgium, but also the battlefields of the First World War. And so what we discovered was that Lille, which was not associated to war tourism, was a specific place for war tourists that came from Great Britain, for instance. So it is another reading of the tourist destination through the mobilities that we propose thanks to this work. I'm checking the time. I still have 2 or 3 minutes. So I will develop this last case study about COVID. So there we use the data from Booking that Gaël managed to scrap very recently. So it allows us to reflect on tourism from the perspective of the effects of COVID, but also to try to interpret the way we have to redefine tourism on specific destinations. We will develop this point. Here we see the variation in bookings, in check-in, sorry, between 2020 and 2019 by months. And obviously in France, of course, the collapse of bookings between March and June, but also the recovery of check-ins in summer, with even volumes of check-ins that went beyond the previous year for some cities. For instance, in the city of Lyon, in August, 25%, it means that there are 25% more check-ins through Booking this year than in 2019. So these 2 graphs show the changes in check-in compared to 2019, and the very strong growth for medium-sized cities, sometimes little regarded as tourist cities themselves. So in this summer, we saw a peak in tourism check-in in several cities that are not regarded as tourists in themselves. And on the contrary, we see that Paris is an exception because the city of Paris, first destination in France and one of the most important in Europe, had never regained or exceeded the volumes that he had in 2019. So the conclusion that we had about that, so these are data for Lille, check-in by months. There in the middle, we can see that it is essentially domestic tourism that enabled the recovery in check-in. And on the right, we see the share of domestic tourism, which was exceptionally high in 2020. Of course, it has been well known and presented by the World Tourism Organization, etc. But the conclusion that we draw on that is that first, there is a strong resilience of domestic tourism, which our studies also have shown in Austria, Germany. We looked also the data for Finland, etc. Both because visitors who usually go abroad have stayed in their own country, but also because we make more visible what is generally undervalued domestic tourism. And so it is the eclipse of international tourism which reveals other mobilities or presences and invites us to be more attentive to it in the post-COVID area. to pay attention to the diversity of visitors, not focusing only on international ones. And this type of data enable us to do that. And so there are therefore different vulnerabilities which can be visualized by a large-scale web scraping by comparing the performances of territories between them. For instance, there in Spain, on the left, Barcelona and Madrid, and on the right, other cities that had performed recovery, San Sebastian and Sanlúcar de Barrameda. So in the future, we want to use this data in order to compare territories and to show the specific resilience that they have towards specific crises. To conclude, some issues and recommendations, we saw the need to integrate new data to the observation and regulation of tourism. This data enable us to rethink the notion of tourist destination, the links between cultural heritage and sites and tourist destinations, and enable us also to render visible specific practices and circulations beyond administrative boundaries or market logics. And of course, we refer to the recommendation, which was Untitled Technologies for Spatial Monitoring of Tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian and Gaël. So I think we can move directly to the next presentation, then we will collect the questions. I've seen that we have already some feedbacks from Maria, but yeah, let's move to the next presentation if you don't mind.
Do you see the next presentation?
Yeah.
From below?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I will present this one. So this presentation is aimed at studying the reception of heritage through the analysis of various elements, pictures, tags, and reviews left by users on social networks, TripAdvisor, Flickr, Panoramio, and Instagram. Although we will focus today on a TripAdvisor review. In this way, we want to provide an understanding of the ordinary experience of heritage sites by visitors in a broad way, both tourists, but also local inhabitants, because they also share and use local networks. For instance, I made a study years ago about Genoa, and local inhabitants also use TripAdvisor in order to complain about local policies towards tourism. So indeed, apart from commercial accommodation sites, Airbnb booking, social networks mix visitors, local, domestic, and foreign tourists. So the challenge is to understand the experience, the lived experience, based on the way the tourist render it and write or picture it. So this experience is multidimensional and may concern the service, the understanding of the site, the interpretation of the site, the way they understand the meaning, the heritage meaning of a site, and which may differ from official narratives and interpretations. So in that sense, we can speak of interpretation from below in the plural, because not all the reviews for the same place, as Sairi already presented it, are similar. We can say that the prehistory or the ancestor of our approach is the study of written guest books in paper that were left or are still left nowadays on heritage sites or museums, and I always wanted to study them, which provide a micro-narrative, sometimes drawings, sometimes also children will work on that, on what is important and the feelings and emotions associated with the visit. We can also mention, as a kind of ancestor of that or prehistory of that, the sharing of pictures by visitors with their relatives through private networks inaccessible to us. We then have access not only to the practices of the visitors, but to a specific form of subjectivity, or tourist subjectivity in a way, of the visit through the narratives that they wrote about their experience. Obviously, there are some limits because this is not communicated immediately in the moment. The visitor will select from among his impressions, emotions, feelings. The post or the review can be written long after, And the very framework of social networks will define the nature of the review. For instance, while TripAdvisor allows a free message, you can write whatever you want, Airbnb asks questions to the visitors and then will force them to speak about the host, the service, the cleaning, etc. In terms of method, it implies various steps. First, to define the sources, reviews, pictures, etc. on TripAdvisor, Instagrams with the tags and the Airbnb, booking, associated with the metadata, of course, which will enable us to define the type of visitors, its origin, its age, etc. To collect the reviews on metadata, thanks to the web scraping that Gael will do. To select the relevant corpus, sorting it by language, aggregating in some cases the reviews according to the scale of the analysis. And then next, we will use lexical analysis from Iramutech or Trop. There are free software which Iramutech based on R, which enable lemmatization, and next to that, quantitative analysis, classifications of text, of sentences, etc. So with the same idea, I will present several cases in order to show the type of problematization that we want to address to this corpus of reviews. So the first one is to show the existence of a plurality of interpretation from below. And we chose the example of what is sometimes called dark tourism or memorial tourism. Here, the cemetery of the American cemetery of Colville-sur-Mer in French Normandy, associated with the D-Day, high place of remembrance tourism in Normandy, with in process World Heritage Site postulation. For that site, there are more than 200 reviews in English, which represents around 200,000 words, which will speak about the beauty of the site, its peaceful character, the sacrifice, etc. So we want to understand what do the tourists talk about, what do they express about this site. And this first table is a classification of the reviews in 5 groups or classes of reviews. It means that each classes will gather all the reviews that will speak about the same topic, using the same words, the same type of sentences, etc. And for instance, classes 3 and 6 on the left will put the emphasis on the concrete interpretation on the site, speaking about the visitor center, the museum, the exhibits, and the impressions of the visitors related to the interpretation of the site. Classes 1 or 2 are more focused on the meaning of the site, center on the idea of the sacrifice of the soldiers and the feeling towards these dead soldiers, respect, but also pride, because they are American and they say we must be proud to be Americans there. So they express a kind of nationalism in a way, but also a personal link that they feel with this site. Class 5 describes the cemetery in itself, the graves, the landscape, and the feeling it conveys. So there are various ways to relate to the experience, to put the emphasis on one aspect, to express a specific emotion with this site. The next table about the same site, the American Cemetery of Colville-sur-Mer, is constructed in another way. We didn't consider the reviews as a unity, but the sentences inside the one review, because we have the idea that one visitor may express several ideas in the same review. So it's a classification of text segments. And we found other types of conclusions thanks to this. For instance, class 6 evokes the horror of the war, the volume of losses, the human cost, without, however, questioning the legitimacy of this battle. This is a very sharp difference with the sites associated with the First World War. in sites associated with First World War, we have a lot of tourists that will say, what about this conflict? They put in question the legitimacy of the battle in itself, whereas in this site, they speak about the horror of the war, but they consider that it was legitimate to give its one's lives in order to deliver France, etc. Case 7 is really focused on the emotion of the visitor, a very interesting way to describe what do they feel in this specific site. And case 8 evokes family connections between the visitor and the places that are visited. And I will focus on this last class, case 8, because we see references to personal stories. There are visitors from abroad, from United Kingdom, from Canada, from United States, but they have the feeling that this specific site will speak to them, and they will speak about their family. For instance, on the right, you have several quotations where the visitors say that an uncle was there, fought on this battle, etc. So these reviews have been written by visitors who pay homage to a relative, but they also describe the context of the visit, or even constitute, in some cases, a reminder of a previous visit. In a way, what we found is that there is a memory of tourism in memorial tourism. They remind that they already went there with a relative. So we see the personal connections that tourists have with a place, what it intimately evokes for them. So the memorial sites are a telling illustration of the possibility to access to visitor experiences and feelings, and to the richness of their interpretation, which may correspond to official presentation of the site, but also which may enrich it, complete it, or even shift and transform it. Still have some time. So the second case is a study that we made with Gail in a research dedicated to star architecture. We had carried out a research on the way star architecture is perceived via reviews on TripAdvisor and via tags on Instagram. And the objective was there to study star architecture from below, with the same idea to understand what does it mean for an ordinary visitor in one way. We wanted to see if the architectural dimension took precedence, priority in the reviews over other dimensions, notably the museum functions of the buildings or the presence of the collections within them. And this table shows by site and by language the most used words and the prevalence of the vocabulary that will evoke architecture building, which allows us to indicate a plurality of reasons for visits and the way we can define the priority of the hierarchy between the motivations to visit one building. Specific case, an emblematic case in that is the Guggenheim in Bilbao. We also operated a classification of the reviews to precise the dominant micro-narratives about this site. 40% of the review are dedicated to the architecture, its aesthetic and iconic effects, whereas 35% are dedicated to the museum, its collections, and its artworks. So to conclude, we have access to the plurality of appreciations and motivations of a site. Of course, we have to combine it with qualitative researches in these cases. Case 3, the idea there is to put the emphasis on the need to consider local inhabitants on these
2 minutes maximum.
Okay, on these social networks. So it is possible to identify the proportion of local inhabitants commenting on their own territory. For instance, you see the Eiffel Tower. There are only 2% of the reviews that have been left written by Parisians. But on other places, we have a high proportion of local reviewers. On this table, for instance, the parks of Greater Paris. For the Montsouris Park, 32% of the reviews have been written by local inhabitants, 30% for the Bois de Vincennes, 79% for the Arboretum outside from Paris. So the idea is to show the logic of narrative enrichment by local inhabitants who contribute to the visibility of minor or peripheral or less famous sites, but also contribute to define their qualities. So this is essential to us. The observation of digital footprints and reviews concerns not only the tourists, but also locals who play a fundamental role in that. And the last case, but I think I don't have time, was about the idea of discovering emotions and concernment from the tourist point of view. They also may express a commitment in favor of heritage, about over tourism, etc. So two very quick examples. This is Montmartre in Paris. A lot of tourists from Canada, United Kingdom, we speak about this crowded neighborhood. So we spoke a lot before COVID about over tourism, but it's not only a concern for local inhabitants. Of course, it's very important for them and they must be the priority, but the tourists themselves are aware of that. And through social networks, we can identify that. And the last perspective was about Notre-Dame de Paris. We were curious to know what do the tourists say now that they cannot visit it anymore. And there are not a lot of reviews, as you may see in this graph, but there are still some reviews, and they speak about, they still speak about Notre-Dame de Paris. They express hope, expectation, and the grandeur of the site, of the monument, despite its destruction. To conclude, there are some issues for heritage and tourism. To have an interest on this interpretation from beyond using social networks. First of all, we can evaluate the effectiveness of interpretation and its reception through digital footprints and review. We also have to recognize an interpretation from below, the plurality of interpretation, possibly at odds with the official narratives. We have also to recognize and enhance local voices on social networks and cultural heritage, and to identify attachment patterns, engagement. The tourist will not only assess, but also speak about, experience, and give emotions about what do they visit. So thank you, and sorry, I think.
So thank you so much, Sébastien and Gaël. We have a few minutes for a conversation on your presentation. So on the one side, Maria, a few minutes ago, was commenting on the chat about the systematic understanding of different heritage sites as part of a destination is absolutely crucial. What shows the comparison between visitation patterns of national and international visitors? I don't know who might answer.
So thank you for the question. Maria, it was about booking data or more in general?
I think it was a general request.
Okay, so Carmelo also had a very interesting illustration about the international index. And we also were interested in the past with Gaël to the proportion of international visitors as compared to national ones. The first conclusion that we may have is that there is a much higher diffusion of domestic tourists in metropolitan area, for instance. And they have the comparison is not only between domestic and international visitors, but also according to specific nationalities. We have various patterns. In Gaël Charéron team, they are trying to map this to have to produce a diffusion index according to the nationality. What is the spatial behavior of the visitors between, for instance, visitors from United Kingdom and visitors from United States, the relation to centrality, the tendency that they have to go towards peripheries, etc. So it's a key issue, but it's difficult to have a kind of general conclusion about that. We have to analyze by territories.
Thank you, Sébastien. There's another question by Armenia, and they are about the methodology you have applied in order to analyze the textual corpus from the online tablet reviews.
The question
You didn't use hashtags, but you computed the full text, right?
Yes, yes. Gael, maybe you can say a word about that.
I don't really understand the question.
Okay, so the idea is that the web scrap will concern everything that has been written on TripAdvisor at a global scale. And after that, the metadata will give the idea that it's a specific place, a specific territory, etc. So we can define the corpus thanks to that. And the analysis is based on quantitative statistics, the most used words, the most used themes, the most frequent correlation between one word and another in the same sentence, etc. We didn't present works on Instagram, but Gael web scrapped also parts of Instagram, and the idea there was to collect and to map the tags and to see the relations also between tags, which was very interesting to see how one tag is associating with another, the logical, or in a way, the logical dictionary of Instagram that we can also map because the tag is also associated with a specific place. For instance, we did that for the tag star architecture in order to see where in the world there are places most associated with the tag star architecture. But we also did that with food, for instance, in Barcelona, where are located the tags associated with specific meals or specialities, etc. So you can vary the scales of analysis.
Perfect, thank you. There is also a question by Camille Castellan, I believe, about using R. I don't know if it's for Gael or maybe even for Carmelo. It's more about the digital technologies being used. Is there anyone willing to answer?
Yes, I don't understand. What is the size of the link?
La taille du lien?
Yes, but oui, without losing, je vois pas ce qu'on perd.
Okay, so apparently there is not an immediate answer.
Maybe Camille,
can you develop your question, Camille?
Okay, so Camille, you
might.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was wondering, when you are doing graphs on R and you are specializing them, like when you were showing the map with all the cities in the southwest of France, and we were seeing the trips of the tourists. But when you do that, when you put a map under the graph, you lose all the length of the links between the people, between the cities, and you can't really do that. Can you? Do you have any name or researchers' names that I can use to see which methodology you use in order to put a map under a graph?
Okay, let's see if there is an immediate answer. Otherwise, I think it's better that you continue afterwards the conversation, maybe sharing some methodological suggestions.
Yeah, don't hesitate to send us an email.
Yeah, that's great. So in many instances, the let's say ethical issue has been mentioned, especially when it comes to the usage of data. Some of them are on purpose shared by travelers, others just used, but without the travelers being aware of such use. Maybe Sebastian, could you say a couple of words? We have just 1 or 2 minutes for.
Yes, okay. First of all, in the process of using the command, there is a process of anonymization of each review. What is interesting for us is not the identity of the contributor, of course, and we don't want to find him and to etc. We never try to contact a contributor through the data that we collected. But the issue, I think, is nevertheless to try to define the possibility of thank you. To define the, to my view, how these data are helpful. I will take two quick examples. First of all, Airbnb. Carmelo used a specific database that is not given by Airbnb itself, but AirDNA. I thought it was that. Because Airbnb actually don't provide the data. And so a lot of researchers around the world had to define specific ways in order to access the data, because Airbnb was addressing very specific and political issues to territories. We saw the case of Venezia, we can speak about the case of Paris, Marais in Paris, etc. And there is a need to try to collect this data, not to confront to people that will host, etc. on Airbnb, but just to have an idea about the effects. I think it's the first step in order to give the possibility to local communities to express some advice about that, is to measure the effects of Airbnb. The first step was to try to define the volume of the data. Concerning the other types of data that we use, among which mainly TripAdvisor, to my view, we try to give to take these reviews as a willing to express a specific experience, and to my view, doing that, we don't have a market use of the data, we don't sell them, etc. We don't use this data in order to sell another thing. On the contrary, we try to understand what the tourist itself tries to say about the data. The ethical issue, the critical ethical issue, I will find it more in specific use of phone data, for instance, because people are not aware about the use of the data, they are sold to other companies, etc. So to my view, there is an ethical issue, but it's not a defect. On the contrary, I think it can be something positive in order to empower the possibility to have an idea about what is the interpretation that visitors with who we don't speak, etc., have about a specific site. So sorry for the answer, it was quite long.
Thank you so much, Sebastian and Gael, for your presentation. So it's my turn now to do a brief presentation, and I will start just reflecting on. We have learned a lot from the previous presentations, and I believe in many cases people, especially from outside of the academia, are asking themselves and ourselves many times, so what? So we produce fantastic visualizations. Besides, I mean, we have seen data from different sources. There are also, for instance, electrodermal activity data based on the physical and emotional reaction in front of monuments, for instance, and many other sources of data about waste. For instance, it's very important to understand who is visiting and what are they doing in a place. And so the question many times from the practitioners and politicians is, okay, to do what, such data for whom and used by whom? So in a sense, this is what is required for a destination to become a smart destination. So basically, smart tourism is the activity or the set of practices which are intended to orchestrate everything, all the data and analysis which have been presented so far, and many others, in order to provide a better touristic experience. So a smart destination should take into account the practices by the DMO, the Destination Management Organization, attraction site, and all the players. So has a lot to do with networking and collaboration within the destination itself. Has a lot to do to understanding the travelers and the prospects. Most of the data we have seen so far are intended to provide more intelligence about who they are, what do they do, how do they feel while being exposed or while visiting a place. Smart destinations should take into account sustainability, like Carmelo was mentioning up front, and Sebastian was mentioning that around 1 year ago, we were still debating about so-called over-tourism, and now we are debating about under-tourism. But sustainability should be factored in order to use such data to ensure that sustainability at the three major levels of economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and socio-cultural sustainability is duly addressed. And so we should orchestrate digital media and data in that direction. So my contribution at first will be just suggesting 5 areas where such data can be used to do what? To improve the quality of access to information. Think of the several narratives. We understand many times we promote a place just with one or a couple of narratives, while based on the data provided by Sebastian, we could enlarge and further include locals there. Or how can we improve the quality of the visit while being there? Think of all the data which have been presented also in the first 2 presentations, or connecting not only visitors with the place, but also with locals, and also locals with the place. And so here I will use just a 90 seconds presentation, and then I will move to reflect on the education dimension.
Recently, information and communication technologies are everywhere, with the diffusion of smartphones and the consequent experience and expectation of being always on. But how can this enhance heritage and sustainable tourism? Well, it's as simple as ABCDE. They enlarge access, providing quality information about heritage places and support for those who want to visit them. E-tourism enriches their experiences with augmented reality, photos, videos, informal learning, and gamification. ICTs connect locals, visitors, and the heritage, for instance through digital storytelling or awareness campaigns. They help disintermediate relationships between prospects and travellers on the one side and tourism hospitality players on the other, ensuring that local communities can really benefit and that tourism is sustainable. Finally, ICTs can educate tourism operators in the field with the flexibility of e-learning, allowing them to learn anytime and anywhere. In these ways, ICTs can be so important to promote sustainable tourism and heritage.
Okay, so here we see on the one side how we can use such data, and on the other side we see that a lot of data are produced through such digital media. For instance, the online travel reviews are produced because there is a digital communication between travelers among themselves and between travelers and the destination. And so the last letter, educate, I think is very important, because in the end, to make such data actionable, to make sure that what we learn through those analyses can be really used in order to improve the quality of tourism, the sustainability of tourism practices, education, I believe, is one of the missing links. So on the one side, it's very important to move from data and data visualization to knowledge. So data in themselves are not enough. So we should interpret them, we should understand them. And someone should be able to do so. And then from knowledge to managerial decisions, I would add also local decisions by local. So it's very important not only to understand data, for instance, about different approaches of travelers to the same heritage, but then what does it mean in terms of co-creating the value of the place, considering both or different and many more approaches. And then up to policies. So it's again not enough to just to say, okay, I understand, I do something, which is nowadays being done by many destinations, many sites, but really to make it the everyday life of practices by heritage site managers and destination managers. So I think here it's not only a question of saying, okay, there's a lot of data out there, but we should understand them and we should ensure that there is maturity on the side of the tourism practitioners and those who are providing policies in the field of tourism and heritage, a maturity to use such data in a wise and constant way, not just for the sake of some individual project or a nice presentation. So it's very important to understand, according to the UNWTO, every 11 or 12 workers, one is somehow involved in the field of travel and tourism. And so we should understand that it's a very diverse workforce. Of course, some of them, very few of them, in fact, they are trained in a university, but most of them are not, are trained in vocational schools or just by practicing the activity. And it's very important to understand that seasonality, the fact that most of the tourism companies are micro companies or small and medium enterprises has a deep impact onto that, because seldom a person could say, okay, I will stay out for 1 full year or 2 full years to study. And so we should really reflect and provide good quality training which addresses such issues. And we have seen, especially in the case of COVID-19, everyone was confined or locked down at home, and training had to be provided, like we are doing somehow today, using digital media. And so here the issue, or the theme, if you like, of massive open online courses comes on stage, considering that people producing somehow knowledge and innovation, like the people we were listening to up to at least a few minutes ago, not considering myself, what they do is somehow accessible to people who in the end will be on the front row while working in tourism. Because otherwise we are just analyzing what has happened and not like our World Heritage, our World Heritage Initiative is willing to do, not leading, but just after months or even years saying, okay, the situation was like that. But I believe our World Heritage Initiative wants really to provide inspiration for future practices. And so I believe that there is also kind of a social responsibility of universities to ensure such a knowledge sharing. And so massive open online courses are part of this. Of course, also learning has a lot to do with data, not only because data could be the topic of the teaching, but we also speak of learning analytics. So we can learn a lot from what learners are doing while interacting with digital platforms. And we can use similar data also while connecting with the industry. Think, for instance, analyzing open positions in the field of tourism on LinkedIn, and by doing so, understanding the actual needs of the industry, and as higher education institutions, being able to provide the right training for the current and future needs of the industry. So just for MOOCs, Maria Gavai was the leader in launching MOOCs together with the UNESCO Unity Network Culture, Tourism and Development, which is headquartered in Paris. MOOCs focused on tourism management at World Heritage Sites. So the first one was really fantastic, a great experience. I had the, I was so happy to participate in this with 19 instructors from 10 universities. As you can see, many learners, and here just to give you some ideas, but we can really learn about who is interested in learning more, what is the background of such people, what are they still studying or employed. For instance, here you see that almost 50% of the learners were full-time employed. So it's very important to understand the kind of people like tourists we are serving, and we should upskill and put in the condition of making the best out of digital data. And so the areas, as you can see, the tourism, transportation, World Heritage Sites management, event management, cultural institutions, restoration, etc., travel, online travel agencies. So it's really a huge number of areas where people are working in the field. We have launched also a second MOOC on the same topic, but with different chapters. But I'm very happy. We have 2 minutes and a few seconds to just introduce the third volume, which again is led by Maria and the Unity Network. And this has been released just today, and I was somehow, let's say, scared because it has been put online while we were speaking. So this is why you might have seen me typing at certain times. But so it will be, and it is available both in English and Arabic. Will be organized in 6 different chapters. And I'm asking you just to watch the trailer for the next few seconds, and then we move to the Q&A session.
The very term heritage suggests that something of value has been transmitted through generations up to ours, and that such generations were and are able to access it as its heirs. In the case of World Heritage Sites, we thus need to balance and orchestrate preservation. Future generations should be able to benefit from it as well as access. The current generation should be able to somehow enjoy it. Sustainability is a major part of the solution.
The third volume of Tourism Management at UNESCO World Heritage Sites MOOC is all about tackling this challenge. How can tourism and the preservation of natural, cultural, and intangible heritage stay in harmony?
Each week you will delve into one of the 6 thematic chapters.
In this new and refurbished volume, experts and researchers will share their extensive know-how in the form of numerous case studies from all around the world. The 6 MOOC chapters will accompany you on how to provide better experience, understanding, and management of tourism in World Heritage Sites.
The recent COVID pandemic has provided even more evidence to the importance of digital media in the field of education. In this massive open online course, you will leverage on information communication technologies to update your knowledge and to upskill yourself when it comes to tourism management in UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
The third volume of the MOOC series, Tourism Management at UNESCO World Heritage Sites, is completely free and will be enjoyed by tourism experts, policymakers, and students alike. Newcomers are welcome to join. Enrollments start now on Fun MOOC. Register with just a click of a button and spread the word.
So here it is. So I'm happy to say that starting today, it's possible to register. So I think now it's time for questions. So I wasn't able to read the chat while speaking, so I'm reading right now. Yeah, so I see, Maria, about big data and ethical issues. I think one issue which maybe has not been addressed explicitly today is the issue of open government data. So I believe as much as possible such data, if managed by public administration, should be provided openly for free, provided, of course, they are anonymized, and it's absolutely impossible to trace back the individuals. But I think in tourism, we are still lagging behind if compared with other domains like healthcare, for instance. And so it would be advisable to encourage public administration to share for free such data. I see I'm not sure it's a question by Sebastian. The notion of smart destination may be a way to integrate the issue of data and crossing data from various sources. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important. For instance, another keyword we haven't mentioned today is artificial intelligence, but in many cases, for instance, it might help to make sense of data which come from very different sources and are not fully, let's say, linked with each other. So we could help figuring out how they might be somehow connected. But I think let's say the most crucial issue is really to make such data actionable and not just
I think that we lost Lorenzo, so maybe this is time to give the floor to Christina Cameron, who will present the conclusions of this workshop. Christina Cameron held the Canada Research Chair in Built Heritage of the University of Montreal from 2005 to 2019, where she directed the research program on heritage conservation. She previously served as a heritage executive with Parks Canada for more than 35 years. She has worked with the World Heritage Convention since 1987, chairing the committee in 1990 and 2008, and co-authoring Many Voices, One Vision. This is a great book that we must suggest to everybody here. Many Voices, One Vision, the early years of the World Heritage Convention. This is an absolutely anniversary reading. So, floor is yours, Christina.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for the invitation to participate. This has been an absolutely fascinating and informative session. And for me, it's shown how much recent advances in information technology are affecting tourism. As you know, the IT group has the impact of the transformational impact of information technologies, and this is nothing short of transformational. What I've retained from the presentations, first of all, is that all of the panelists really have spoken about the limitations of data that have previously been used to analyze tourism, and particularly things like the UNWTO number of international arrivals or occupancy rates and so on, entrance fees and entrance numbers for key attractions. But I think the panelists have really shown us that the old ways don't tell us much about how visitors behave, but the new technologies do. And I was struck by the statement that Lorenzo made about visitors leave digital footprints on the internet. And this is clearly so from what we've seen today. We can see the way visitors behave and move around protected areas and historic sites and certainly historic cities, and they can be monitored by new media with sensors and mobile devices and so on, and the pictures that tourists post and the stories that they tell on big data sources like social media sources and the blogs and Instagram and Flickr and TripAdvisor and Booking and so on. We've seen lots of those examples today. What I see in that is the opportunities for big data. This is really a big opportunity for the tourism sector. And first, and probably of greatest importance from what I've taken here, is that big data gives you objective information about visitors and their behaviors on the site, whether that's a small site or whether that's an urban center. And what Sébastien Gaël referred to as non-market data. And I think that's really an important part, but it's a shift. So I think it can really affect the way sites are managed. And I think the tourism index of Carmelo is interesting for that. And it can change the focus of interpretation programs, and visitors may find new or different reasons in their reports of what is important about these places that are not really part of the official discourse or the official presentation program. So that's interesting. Can also give you precise information for monitoring. Understanding the visitor use and movement can help to manage congestion by spreading out the crowds where there's over-tourism, and also by reducing potential damage to the physical places and also unsatisfactory visitor experiences through overcrowding, which is another part that we heard today. So I conclude in what I've heard that mining big data, what you call web scraping, which is a new word for me, web scraping is and will be transformative. It provides information on visitor behavior at the macro level. And as Carmelo showed, you can go down to the granular micro level. It's an important point, and Maria, you commented on it in the chat, that it can redefine what is a destination and can show the linkages among regional sites, which is really cross-marketing opportunities as I see it. And also, again, enhancing the visitor offer and spreading out the visitor experience. It also connects urban features with visitor clusters in real time, and that's this congestion issue, assuming that we get back to some form of over-tourism. It points to new and different values. This, I think, is quite important in the context of reconciliation and sites of conflict and so on, where we're always encouraging that all points of view be taken into account. I think mining big data will give a new and different understanding of the values that visitors see in the sites. And I think, one, it will enrich the visitor presentation programs that will then have a focus on a plurality of values, not a single official value, but it also leads to that whole exercise of reconciliation over conflicting values. So that one, I think, has great potential for that other theme. And of course, web scraping provides monitoring data to conserve the sites in sustainable ways. And that is one of the overall objectives of our World Heritage. And of course, Lorenzo referenced this, the new technologies can enhance learning, both on-site and virtual rather. So I think that's really an important part as well. So those are the main ideas I took out of what I heard today. And I retained two challenges, which I think are really important and unresolved at this point. And one is about the ethical issue, the privacy concerns when you're mining big data. And well, you can talk about it being voluntary. I'm not sure it's voluntary if the people who have left the comments and have posted are aware of how that data will be mined, even though it's dealt with in an anonymous way, as Sébastien explained. It's still, for me, there are some ethical concerns around mining this data, these data. And the second is, and I saw that in some of the comments in the chat, is then, okay, so we're learning these new ways of web scraping and mining data and using new open data and analytical tools, but how can we integrate all that at the site level? How can the site managers integrate all that so that they can use it for planning and managing their sites? So that would be my takeaways from what I saw today. I really appreciated it. I thought it was a very interesting morning for me, afternoon for you. So back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina, for this excellent conclusion.
Thank you.
I would like to thank also all the presenters. Those are wonderful presentations, and I think they will be very, very useful. We will come back to you for the recommendations. You saw in my comments, now the need is really to translate your proposals into recommendations. I also would like to thank a lot Lorenzo. It is 4:02, means that we are only 2 minutes out of schedule. It's always very, very good to give this moderation task to a colleague from a Swiss university. So thank you so much, Lorenzo. And I also would like to thank a lot all the colleagues who helped with the organization of our World Heritage. I would like to thank Minja Yang, who is the coordinator of this tourism theme. She could not be with us today because she's exactly at the same time in another webinar, which is in Egypt, in relation with art and heritage in Luxor and Egypt. I also really would like to thank a lot all the volunteers who work on the initiative, and mainly the Secretariat, who is working day and night in order to make these webinars and seminars, and more globally, the initiative possible. So thank you so much to all of you. Thanks a lot. And of course, stay connected for the other events this week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.